morning I want to share a story with you. We did not share this story for about 11 months. It was only about 3 weeks ago at a camp in Texas that we finally felt God speak to our heart and say that now is the time to share this story. August 12, 2006, almost a year ago, we were in Columbus, Ohio. We were doing a show outside, about 1,000 people at this mall. The show was going perfect. Everything was going real well.
This is the world's only full-view water torture cell. Please welcome to the stage the world's premier female escape artist, Kristen Johnson.
The show's going perfectly. Everything's going well. We get to the finale, the water cell, of course. Kristen gets into the tank, drops in. We put the lid on, lock it. Once again, everything's going normal. She gets all the handcuffs off, all the leg irons. She finally gets to the lock on the lid. She actually picks it and actually got the lock undone, but had not actually taken it off yet. And at that point in time, she convulsed, and her head went back, and it was limp. And she turned an eerie shade of blue instantly. We had always had a plan between us. We always had a signal that she would give us in case something ever went wrong. And this afternoon there was no signal. So I took the key off around my neck. I went to the lock that was nearest to me, put the key in the lock, took it off, threw the lock to the ground. I ran around to the other side of the tank, pulled my key up, got ready to put it into the lock, and I was holding a lanyard with no key. It actually busted off in the first lock. So I hit the lid as hard as I could, busting it right off the top, taking the hatch and everything with it, threw it to the ground. I jumped as high as I could, and I don't have a real good vertical, but somehow that day I was able to land up on top of the tank, reached in, grabbed Kristen's head, and I was able to get her above water. I then worked her body out, flopped her onto the ground. She was lifeless. She was still blue. I wasn't sure if she had possibly swallowed her tongue too at this point in time, so I slapped her. She didn't know this part for a long time. Slapped her one more time. Finally, her eyes opened. She was looking all around. She was on the ground with people around on stage. And I looked at her. I said, "Do you know who I am?" She was still looking around. I said, "Kristen, you know who I am?" And she said,
"You're the love of my life."
She woke up. She said, "You're the love of my life." And at that moment, probably the most powerful thing, at least physically and medically, she exhaled. She was still holding her original breath of air, which is incredible in and of itself, but the great thing is it kept all the water out of her lungs, which kept away infection and pneumonia. Paramedics came, fire department came, checked her out, everything was fine. A gentleman came up on stage, he was there on scene. He was an emergency room physician. We didn't know it at the time, but we checked her email later that evening. And he emailed and said, "Hey, I was there on the scene. I saw what happened. This is what I believe happened. That Kristen had suffered a hypoxic seizure." We had also come to the same conclusion as well that afternoon. And a hypoxic seizure can be brought on by a lot of things. It's usually experienced by shallow water free divers. It can be brought on by dehydration, exhaustion, and low blood sugar. Well, Kristen was 5 days into an Atkins low-carb diet, so pretty much she had no blood sugar. And so that's what brought that on that afternoon. We have since remedied the situation. We always make sure that she's got something to eat just before we go on stage, and she has since done the water cell well over 120 times since. Last October, she did it 56 times in October alone. Once during a span of 10 days, 30 times in 10 days. So we're quite confident that we're never going to see this again.
The world's premier female escape artist,
And I'm telling you this story because you guys have hopefully, got to meet us, and a lot of you care about Kristen already, and you have asked, "Hey, if something ever happened?" And we want to be honest with you. We want to share this story for a very specific reason, because that afternoon, 4 people's lives were changed forever. A gentleman came up on stage. He was there on the scene. He was an emergency room physician. He said, I was sitting there kneeling by Kristen. And when you ask her, do you know who I am? And she responded with, you're the love of my life. He said, I could sense that God was right there at that moment. He said, it caused me to reflect on my life. You see, he had said, I always focused on my career and worldly things and what I thought was important. But it made me realize there were things far more important than even being an emergency room physician. His family and his relationship with God were the things he needed to focus on. Unfortunately, my father, the only show he saw was that one right there, and a lot of my family, they'd never seen it before, and that's the show they unfortunately had to see. We had to be in Indianapolis the next day. And we thought, you know what, we just really need to keep an eye on Kristen, make sure she's going to be okay, that no infection is going to set in. So we called ahead and said, hey, we're going to need to cancel this event. And they said, that's totally fine, we understand. And I'm telling you all of this because I want you to understand that God can use any situation in your life, no matter how negative, something you couldn't possibly dream or make up, God can use it for good. Because of the situation, it caused us to stay in Columbus, Ohio another day. And that was one more day I got to spend with my father. And I took him aside that next day. It was a Sunday afternoon. I said, Dad, and at this point in time, my father is not doing real well. He's suffering from emphysema. He's dying from lung cancer. Alcoholism has definitely taken its toll on his body. He's probably weighing 120 pounds. He's very frail at this moment. I said, Dad, I know when we lived together for 10 years of my life that we went to church every day. But I need to know for sure, do you know Jesus Christ as your Savior? And he looked me in the eyes and he said, Kevin, of all the things that I've done wrong against you and your sister and against your mother, he said, I'll tell you today that 100% I do know Jesus Christ as my Savior. And that was important for me to hear. My sister got to spend time with him and to have some closure and some healing. Healing that was long overdue. So we spent that day with him on Sunday. 47 days later, I got a phone call that my father had passed away. Lung cancer had finally taken its toll, and we got that phone call. But if it was not for God using this tragic situation to keep us in Columbus one more day, then I wouldn't have got to spend any extra time, and I would never be comforted knowing if I'd ever get to see my father again. But I stand here today, even as hard as it is, to not have him, not be able to call him, to not spend Father's Day with him earlier or late last month. I know that someday me and my sister again will get to see him. And that makes all the difference in the world. And so the four people whose lives were changed were this emergency room physician, my sister, myself, and I pray that my father too cherished that last day that we got to spend together.